what's important is we need to believe in something enough to push the boundaries, not with the motivation to be mischievous, not to be with the motivation to be a national hero, but because this is our country and we believe in it, somebody's got to do it. You take the lead, you push the boundaries. But not everybody is comfortable doing that. So how do we move away from this?
I think one of the fear stems from the law itself being vaguely, worded, and it can be applied in many situations. And my question, I disagree with Daniel because I am involved in a lot of interfaith dialogue. And a lot of times we are not able to do it because the law itself restricts us from speaking. Well, you have Hong Lim Park, you have freedom of speech except race and religion. And the question is why? Why is it so sensitive that you cannot talk about it? Of course, we need to draw...
What have you wanted to say that you felt you couldn't say because of the law?
Oh, what we want to engage in dialogue, right? And to speak up. From my perspective, as a Christian person, about various issues that concerns us, right? But the law prevents any talk about religion at all within the space of Hong Lim Park.
Yeah.
So you have to.
In other words, you will not be given the license. You will not be given the license if your subject matter is, let's talk about race and religion, right? That's what you're saying.
Not just about race and religion. For whatever topic that is being talked about, from the angle of race and religion, you're not allowed to talk about that. So that is a huge block from us from opening up to speak up openly. When people go crazy, like Amos Yee, well, he hijacked one of my posts on my Facebook, and he started posting his videos and whatnot. And I went like, you know what, dude, this is my Facebook, and don't hijack it for your own stuff, stop trolling me. I just wrote him a reply, and then I just blocked him and removed him from my Facebook. This is how to engage with people that you do not want to listen to.
Yeah.
I think that when someone goes crazy and yell and say crazy stuff, that's one way of dealing with it. Of course, I agree with Kam Hong that there's some limits to speech. I will not stand by when someone makes threats or violence against someone else or people of faith. If someone says, I want to burn down a religious building, I'm against that. But that is very clear when we want defined, when people are inciting violence or hate. But when you define, but I don't know when we...
No, but what is the definition of violence and hate? Okay, for example, let me ask you a question, all of you. Charlie Hebdo, cartoons, right? Have you seen the cartoons? I was offended when I saw the cartoons. I'm a Hindu. I was offended by the cartoons and the caricatures, right, that implicated Catholicism, right? I was offended. But I didn't do anything about it. I was just upset about it as I felt it was wrong. But that doesn't mean that everybody would just be offended and stop at that. Somebody else may be offended enough to feel justified to take a stronger course of action.
Well, someone felt strong enough to go.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Amos.
That's what I'm not justifying terrorism. I'm not justifying violence. I'm just saying that you can't assume that every one of us is homogeneous in the modality of action. We are not.
So most countries, with free speech extremists accepted, most jurisdictions have some kind of restriction on speech, and that tends to be along the lines of preventing harm.
Yeah.
And there's a debate whether harm, like incitement to violence, bringing down the institution of the state, things like that, direct harm to identifiable individuals or institutions. Interesting question is whether offence should be an additional restriction on free speech. And historically, some countries will go down that path. And so Europe notoriously, partly because of its history and what happened during the Second World War, denial of the Holocaust is a crime, not because Jewish people or other people are going to be necessarily harmed by denial of the Holocaust, but it's for the historical reasons that there are, and I think there are good reasons for wanting to constrain that kind of speech. The interesting question is, as you say, how much do you trust your society to deal with speech in the way that most people would think you deal with bad speech, with more speech. You react to it, as opposed to going and picking up a weapon or doing something violent. And that begs a question about the maturity of society, which takes us back to your earlier question as to whether we are ready, and it depends a lot on who you mean by we.
You see, I am for free speech, and I generally intellectually agree with the argument that it's up to you as to how you want to take that. But at a societal level, I am honestly not sure, because I've got some violent friends too. You know, I'm not sure how these guys are going to react. These are guys who get upset within 10 seconds, and they are mercurial. You know, these are guys I've been to a pub with, and they're just looking for a fight. So I'm not sure how he's going to react. I know I'll react in a certain way. I'll respond. He is likely to react, and once he reacts, there's a chain reaction.
You realize you're pointing at me when you say that.
Yeah. It was not incidental. You know? but you see, the thing here is, it says inciting violence, right? If an act incites violence, that's wrong.
Well, incite violence, that's reasonably clear. Incite means you're actually encouraging someone to be violent.
Yeah.
Inciting ill will or ill feeling, that's...
No, but my point is inciting violence. So is Charlie Hebdo guilty of inciting violence? Inciting? No, what is the meaning of incite?
It assumes an intent.
I challenge that because we had the discussion before during the Charlie Hebdo incidents, and I have discussion with my friends. And when you are provoked, does it mean that you are allowed to resort to violence?
No.
We have laws to restrict violence, to criminalize violence and violent behavior. So if someone provoked you and you beat that person up, you broke the law. So, you know, that's the thing. I'm not advocating for
I don't think
freedom of speech that's unfettered.
Yeah.
But I think that we need to be reasonable enough to think that if somebody reacts and overreacts at a provocation,
proportion,
any kind of provocation, if it's not proportionate, then our law, you know, we have laws in place to charge people for doing something like that, like the guy who went up to slap Amos. I think that's way out.
Yeah.
And you know, Viswa, sounds like your friends will get provoked by anything.
Yeah,
not just race or religion.
Crazy people. Yeah.
So that's maybe not a great example of crazy people who might be provoked by anything. In which case, you know, why are we making law for that, right? And that brings me to my next point, which is that I think conceptually we have to decide if we should be making law for that lowest common denominator in that way. This is ultimately, when you drill down to it, a balancing act between the value of free speech and, you know, the value that we ascribe to safety and order and all those things, right? That is what it is. But when you peg it at the lowest common denominator, you always end up, you know, that's necessarily ending up on the side
but you see,
of
come on, I'm not sure how one can make a decision whether this is pegged at which percentile. I'm not sure, isn't it?
I don't think it's scientific.
No, I mean, I'm really, somebody's got to make the decision, right?
Yes.
The government will have to make the decision, and I don't envy the government here for having to make that decision. So I'm just asking who exercises that discretion to say we need to stop this we allow. We can start opening up the space. I think there's a lot more space today for open discussions on this. This, for example, would not have been kosher some time back.
We would have had the guy sitting in the corner with the earpiece
and wondering, and then we may be wondering whether those are sprinklers, right? So
I don't think anyone's going to have any trouble watching this. So.
No, but we're not sure. But I think the system has been opening up. I've been involved in several fairly open, direct conversations, dialogues, very open, about race, religion, sensitivity, but within closed doors. Sometimes with about 300 people present. The question is, would I be comfortable having that same discussion in Hong Lim Park? Honestly, I'm not very comfortable because I have no idea who is going to be standing there in the audience. I have no idea. But in a more controlled environment, when I know who I'm speaking to, like you guys, I'm more comfortable, right? So actually, I want to ask Wilson, you're just staring at us. You know, I presume there's some processing going on. You want to share what's going on in your head?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talked about the law being the safety net, sort of the final resort for people to get to, and I'm sure that there are various shades in between that we should move towards in terms of having a common ground for engagement. However, I think that we've yet to push, as you say, those boundaries because we just either feel we're not ready, and we've talked about this before, that we really should try in different stages. But I think in a controlled way, as you put it as well, because I don't think we are. I don't
in
think
a managed way,
in a managed way, in a controlled way, in a way where people coming forward are, you know, like you say, identifying themselves. They're not doing it in an anonymous way. They're coming forward, putting their names down, saying that, and with the ground rules of being respectful, of being courteous, and not necessarily trying to be inciting any ill will or violence. And I think if that's the common approach of wanting to come together to inform, to investigate what's the truth in a dialogue, and ultimately to influence and to come to each other's point of view, I think we'll be more mature as a society as we move forward. However, because I think we are not quite in that situation now, there may be people who have been offended by certain things, and they took the decision to go to the police, file a report,
Yep.
as a professor has said.
Yep.
And I mean, just for a moment putting myself in their shoes and speculating what was going on in their minds, they might have felt that, look, this fella is out there saying all these things, I'm really unhappy about it. What am I going to do? Am I going to flame him? Am I going to publicly lynch him? Am I going to gang up with a few friends? Or should I go to the authorities and have some kind of controlled response and leave the discretion in the hands of the Attorney General, who is a professional in this kind of thing, and decide if something should be brought against this person?
And the irony there, to go back to a point you were dancing around, clearly they were upset because of what he said about Lee Kuan Yew,
Yeah.
not what he said about Christians.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah,
interrupt.
so, no, I mean, that's absolutely right. And so I think these people possibly felt that there was no real avenue of redress, and so the law was what they went to, and unfortunately, the law is a blunt instrument. It will be used in a certain way, and I think discretion, although was exercised to prosecute, you also pointed out that the prosecution is not asking for a conviction or a jailing. So that's an extent of the nuance that is being exercised, I think, by the prosecution in this particular case.
Maybe
Thanks.
one point that, as a foreigner here, if you like, the international dimension of this is interesting because the restrictions play into stereotypes about Singapore,
Yes.
but they're often playing into caricatures of Singapore. And just one case also connected with the passing of Mr. Lee. Prior to his death, you may recall, there was a false posting
Yes.
that someone circulated, a doctored image. I was speaking to a lawyer, a qualified lawyer, a senior person, who asked me, is it true that the teenager who posted that was given 17 years in prison? And I said, this is the teenager was not even charged, was given a stern warning, that was the end of the matter. But the idea that someone would think this could happen in Singapore, I was shocked.
And there would be people who are quite prepared to believe it because of a certain perception of Singapore. You know.
Which is changing slowly.
Raja, you've got a view on the right to be offended.
A couple of things. One is, if Daniel said that law has to be the safety net, but it could also be the flying dagger, depending on who's using it and how we are using it. And from what I gather, we are at the mercy of the AGS office and who's in power on that day. So in that case, why not just be done with it? One way of looking at it.
Be done with
This, all these acts that prevent any kind of
legislation.
shackling of freedom of speech in any form. And the second thing is, internationally and everywhere, it looks like right now we are moving into an environment where you have the right to get offended, and when you act, it becomes the person who spoke is inciting violence. rather than the government trying to curb your violent activities, they're trying to shift the blame over to the person who spoke and trying to curb their freedom of expression. And I don't think that's right.
But do you not feel that there is this correlation between action and reaction? I'm not just, and of course, the proviso of proportionality has to be taken into account. But is there not a correlation between action and reaction?
There is action and a reaction, but like in the case of the cartoons or whatever,
Yeah.
it wasn't an intended reaction from their side. That's one. And the second thing is, you are kind of in a way responsible for the actions of the people who are on your side. Let's say I'm speaking for some sect and my people, I'm inciting violence against someone else and they are part of my sect or faction. Then I'm kind of responsible. But if it's the violent reaction from someone else, it's different somehow, I think.
Okay. Weiju, you're a communications person.
Yeah,
What's
I
your
just want to go
perspective?
back to the larger question of are we ready? So, and to Simon's broader question, how do we define we? I think if we define we to include the government, then I think we are not. Because as a Singaporean this morning when I read Straits Times front page, and my reaction was, there we go again, setting certain OB markers, right? And we are quite well known as a nation of OB markers. So I think that the message is very clear. We are not ready for freedom of speech where race and religion are concerned.
That's the message from the PM.
That's the way, as a Singaporean, I would read it.
Okay.
Right. So I think you know, the conversation should not always be, are Singaporeans ready? But well, maybe are all Singaporeans ready? And that would include our government. Do they have the wisdom? Do they have the finesse to differentiate? Or you know, when they go to Parliament, what are some of the considerations before they enact law? Yeah. So those are my thoughts.
So let me ask you, you know, there's been quite a bit of talk about, let's give ourselves a little bit more credit, right? I mean, how long are we going to continue with this crutch of rules and regulations? When are we going to take a chance on ourselves and say, if we open up, we'll manage? There may be a few mistakes here and there, but you know what? We'll learn from each other, right? I mean, this argument has been presented, for example, when questioning issues such as, should we have a GRC, right? Should we have a government, I mean, a group representation constituency, on the assumption that if you don't, then minority candidates will not be elected because majority of Chinese will elect only Chinese. You see what I mean? That's the whole rationale behind that, right? Similar argument about Singapore is not going to be ready for a non-Chinese prime minister. But these arguments are presented, but it's all in the same vein, you see, that we need these rules and strictures and structures because of certain assumptions of behavior, right? Now, are we ready, you think, to start moving and taking a bigger chance with ourselves? Should we? There will be mistakes, not can be, there will be mistakes. There'll be errors of judgment along the way. But what will happen if we don't start taking a chance?
Well, I personally think that a lot of Singaporeans have started taking a chance, right? In the way they talk, the way they discuss online, and even the way they react, right? Rightly or wrongly. So I would take Kam Hong's point that there's a wide chasm between the crazy people who do crazy things and where we are now. So if you try to regulate according to the crazy people, then you're not going to get anywhere.
Right. Samantha?
Building on your question of are we ready, I think it's not so much about are we ready, because as others have said, there's going to be crazy people, and there's not ever going to be a point where everyone is ready. There will always be those who are intolerant and will just be offended whatever you say and do. So I think those who are ready and want to move forward should lead the way, but perhaps with caution. I don't know how it's going to be calibrated. I think your point about, what about those who are offended and, they get violent, I think that's a fair point. yeah, I'm not quite sure how it's going to get calibrated.
I think
but
that's the concern of government, clearly.
Yes.
You know, what if a few of these guys start reacting? I think my sense, there's a general assumption that vast majority of Singaporeans will behave in a certain way, in a fairly rational way. But you have a few guys, nutcases, who may react in a certain way. This is the basic assumption of the government, right? So, should those assumptions be suspended at this point in time? Are we ready for that? That's really what we're talking about, right? Fazil.
Okay, for me, right, I really like interested to all this getting ready and stuff like that, and I feel that are we ready? My take is no, but don't get me wrong, I think Singaporeans are just getting prepared. Why is that so? Is because right now we do not know how far can we go, or how do we even start, and that's why there are situations like this, and we do hear stuff like it's a very good bad example, and from all these situations we are learning. And for me, speaking from a very young generation of Singaporean, I think all these kind of incidents and scenarios are a learning platform for us to go much more. So what I'm saying right now is that, for example, take the police case, for example. Why people file police case? It's because probably we do not know where are the proper channel to go to, and therefore we feel that we have to refer this to the police case because one, it's sensitive, and number two, you are dealing with the law. All right, so that's why people decided to file this police case. And another thing that I feel is that this kind of freedom of speech, it takes time. And truly we are at a very early stage of freedom of speech. So maybe for 20 or 30 years down the road, when people come to you and say, hey, you know, this issue, I think I have to stand for something. And the kind of reply you get for 20 to 30 years, hopefully it will be like, that's something that's respectful for you to do. But today, if you say that to our friend, you say, they will reply like, are you kidding me? Are you serious? Have you thought of the consequences? Because why we do that is because we are still not familiar of what we can do and what we cannot do. So that is my take. And I'm still wanting to hear what are other solutions that we can actually do as a government, or maybe can we propose? Because right now we are hearing about situations whereby this is bad, this is wrong. All right, then how can we move forward? We can't move forward without knowing what are the solutions that we can actually have. So I think the questions that a lot of youngsters are asking today is, other than a Hong Lim Park, what are other venues that we can actually approach and will be legal and not putting us to a very detrimental consequences? Right. So that's my take.
Come home. I think you're the right person to respond
Facebook,
to that.
but come on, go ahead.
The truth is, the avenues for expression, the offline avenues for expression in Singapore are actually extremely limited. You know, Hong Lim is Hong Lim, but it's really hot. And you don't really get a crowd anyway nowadays, unless you are talking about foreigners, I guess. There is, the other thing is you can do indoor forums where actually you don't need a permit unless it's about race or religion or you have a foreigner speaking. And beyond that, it's all about the internet, right? I do think that the internet has the internet being what it is, has gone pretty far. It's kind of dragging the rest of Singapore along. Yeah. And in a way, you know, if you look at some corners of the internet, all this discussion about calibrated, managed, kind of opening up it's so far behind the curve. Yeah. If you go to places like Stomp, if you go to places like Hardware Zone, it really is a free-for-all. And these two sites are actually owned by SPH, which is, you know, interesting. Yeah. But it is actually a free-for-all, and there's all kinds of offensive things going on there. Yeah. Truly. Yeah. Truly. And, you know, for better or for worse, no one does anything about it. No one seems to be particularly offended by it. I mean, well, to the extent of undertaking extreme acts. So I think that's where we'll go. I think over time, I agree with Viswa. You know, I'm not young, I'm not that old either, but we're definitely much more free than 20 years ago. I think we've opened up a lot. Yeah. And that's the long-term trajectory. Yeah. You know, we are going to continue to open. Just being, by virtue of the internet, being a global city, all these things will contribute to that. I feel that the pace is not quick enough. And I feel that we are missing out on all kinds of opportunities, both economic and non-economic, because we're not moving fast enough.
What are the, apart from economic sort of externalities, what do you think we stand to lose out? I mean, what are the dangers if we do not move fast enough? I think as a society.
I think the Reverend puts up a good point, which is that when you hold it all in, the only way it comes out is as an explosion.
Yeah.
Right.
Or
That's
an implosion.
Right.
Yeah.
But it comes out in a very unhealthy way.
Yeah.
You know, but I think more broadly, when you think about it, I think we need to. I mean, look, 50 years is young nation. It's not really a baby nation. It's not old by any means. But there should be increasing levels of maturity. And so long as we artificially hold back discussions, not just about race and religion, but all kinds of things. Because when you have restrictions on race and religion, then naturally you will have restrictions on other things as well. If you artificially hold us back from maturing in our thoughts as a nation, then we don't have that kind of resilience to deal with things. We also don't have the ability to generate the intellectual capital that we actually need to grow as a country. And that's why I feel like we're losing out.
Viswa, if I may
Yes,
just
please,
pitch in there. I think we, as Fazli mentioned, I think there are so many negative examples out there. Court cases, people being charged and prosecuted. We kind of know what's not to do, what's being frowned upon. But in terms of positive examples, we see very few of that. The avenues for discussion is limited, as Kam Hong said. On the internet, you have, it's pretty unregulated, and anyone can say anything. And again, I don't think that's a good example in terms of role modeling the right kind of discourse. So I think, again, in terms of recommending certain steps to be taken, if there can be, again, an environment where a debate can take place, a debate between people who we know are going to be civil, but are going to be robust, dealing with possibly sensitive topics like race and religion, but done in such a way that it's going to show people that, wow, this is amazing. We can talk about these things here in Singapore, and back and forth, examining the truth, trying to inform, and then ultimately understand, agreeing to disagree, and walking away from it all with no violence, no one throwing chairs and throwing anything and killing anyone. And if we see more of that happening in possibly a control and in a safe way, then I think people will have a sense of what's to be done.
And maybe Viswa could host it.
Yeah, exactly. So,
so
I think this
is
clearly a step that we're taking and we're going forward. And this is one of the forums that I think absolutely helps in that respect.
Thank you. Afsoon, you are PR here.
Yes,
You're from Iran?
From Iran originally.
Okay. So why don't you share with us some of your perspectives, having lived in a country like Iran, and here, what are the lessons you can learn? You can share with us.
Yes, for sure. Because I guess that you would look at the other extreme of pressure that you can see, living in an environment that people, for very personal decisions, they are under scrutiny. They can't make their own decisions on how to dress, how to communicate what they do behind closed doors, even in their homes. So basically, this is aside from media and talking about what's going on in the government. So it's the most extreme censorship that you can see. And I also lived over 20 years in North America. I'm a Canadian citizen, but living in that other extreme is, again, another basically side of the spectrum that you can experience. And coming to Singapore, seeing this, basically how this is going to be dealt with, and it's very interesting to me to see the result of any solutions that comes through these discussions and opening up. And again, for sure, we don't want to see self-censorship. We don't want to see this to cause this community and this country not to go forward in many different fronts that can be done. And for sure, it's very interesting to see, and I would like to see this, basically, how the solution is going to come about. And really appreciative of such forums that you have put together. It definitely opens the doors, and I'm very much agreeable with starting with controlled environment and managed places where people can see positive ways of freedom of expression for the most part.
Do you feel that freedom should be absolute?
It should be given. Again, people have to know that there are boundaries as well. It has to be dealt with maturity. And again, people need to lead the way and show how is it done the proper way that it should be dealt with, so people can learn and follow.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Ayush.
Yeah, just talking about...
You've lived...
I've lived in Singapore for almost 12 years.
And before that?
15 years in India and 2 years in the US.
Okay.
And it's a very interesting question about are we ready, right? And there are multiple factors to it. One which was spoken about is the whole online aspect. Whether we are in the offline world, the online world is moving forward anyway. So we do have to be cognizant about that.
Yeah.
The other aspect I want to talk about is maybe a way to think about this is like an organizational change. In the sense that any organizational change, you'll have various spectrum of people. Some who would be ready for it, others in the middle, and others who will be laggards, and you'll have to pull them through. And the question when you are thinking from an organizational perspective isn't are we ready to do it? The important firstly is, do we need to do it? And then you figure out a way to manage that transition. And I think that's probably a conversation we need to have, especially around what was said about managing this transition, ensuring that any side effects of this transition, how do we handle those in a peaceful and in a legal way?
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Eugene, I saw you nodding.
I just have 2 points to contribute to today's discussion.
Do you agree with Ayush?
Yes, I think he made several good points about the development of free speech.
Yep.
The 2 points I wanted to add was, I agree that law should act as a safety net, but I also feel that there should be platforms for people to express themselves. I think Kam Hong raised the examples of Stomp. Perhaps another example I saw could be 9gag. I mean, for people who like to have their caricatures being published, there can be an avenue where people know that this platform is not to be taken so seriously, and that sets the context of their expression. So perhaps more examples of these platforms that come up. But the second point I wanted to raise was the idea of education, that I think in order to speak well, you need to know what to speak. And there is this growing concern that Singaporeans get...
What to speak or how to speak?
What to speak.
Okay.
And I think that contributed a lot to the fear Singaporeans felt perhaps 20 years ago, that if you ask for their views, they'll be, oh, but what should I say? And will what I say, be against me? So I think education is very important. But one concern is, I think Singaporeans, or a lot of us, are getting our news information from social media alone. And there is these, there are these algorithms that try and detect what type of person you are, and they feed you the news that you want to receive. And so in order for a more vibrant discussion, or to take the online discussion to a new or next level, I think the point was raised that there are books around, but are Singaporeans going to make the effort to read? Are Singaporeans going to make the effort to know more about the topic before they speak? Or are they just going to follow what majority says on online social media? Are they going to check about the truth before being incensed by it? So I think there can be some form of effort behind wanting free speech. Are you ready, as the question was asked, to even take up the responsibility to back up what you say with some form of verification? And are there ways that we can do it? Or are we going to be lazy and just rely on Facebook? Or even you look at Google search, for example, sometimes over time they would just try and outsmart you by saying, I think I know what kind of person you are, and give you the results that you would like to.
And this to me is one of the great ironies, that Singapore is notoriously unregulated in the marketplace of ideas. Singapore is relentlessly pragmatic. The government, for the most part, is unideological. It looks for the best solution around the world. And so that marketplace of if you try and regulate the marketplace of ideas, you lead to bad results. But I think for historical reasons, and good historical reasons, there is a certain wariness. And for geographical reasons, if you look around the neighbourhood, there are reasons to think that the possibility of the crazy people getting violent in response to speech that in other environments might be acceptable, that is not an irrational concern on the part of government.
It's not. But I was quite interested in something that you said earlier, Eugene, that one particular line about us taking ourselves very seriously. Some of my friends have actually said one of the big problems is that Singaporeans take ourselves very seriously. Too seriously. We give a lot of importance to ourselves. Therefore, we don't have a sense of humor. We don't have the capacity to really laugh at ourselves, take the mickey out of each other. And I mean, even when you had lampooning, you had caricatures drawn, some of our political leaders were offended when that was done, when actually it's a matter of course, you know, elsewhere. So can we afford to let up a little bit more? Because as people, if we can actually let up a little bit more and not be so, not give ourselves so much of importance, maybe we'll stop reacting or be fearful of reaction. But the truth is, Singaporeans are quite highly strung, by and large, I feel, myself included, you know. My daughter tells me that all the time, you know. So can we afford to chill a little bit more? Storm and you know, Hardware Zone and other sites are helping people chill. But is that a factor? Is that a consideration? Maybe Wing Chuan?
I think Singaporeans do look to be offended. But so while I was coming in today, I was caught in two minds. You know, I mean, offense is taken; it's not given.
Mm-hmm.
But then, on the other hand, I do believe that free speech it does not equal freedom from consequence.
Right.
Right. So I mean, they're two very conflicting trains of thought, and I think along the way, with the debate, I think I've arrived at the conclusion that the line is the law. I mean, you can be offended, but don't do anything outside of the law. Don't get violent. Don't, you know, kill somebody. That is where the line is. And Singaporeans can afford to chill a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm a lawyer. Maybe I'm not a very good one. But I'm a lawyer. I would actually disagree as a matter of kind of principle that the law should define the line. Instead, we should define the line, and then the law should be written to help us enforce that line.
Yeah.
Right. To accept what the law says as the line is to put the cart before the horse, and also it locks you into the past, you know, because laws are made hundreds of years, well, you know, up to maybe a century ago, right? So I think we actually need to question the laws that are in place, constantly question and evaluate if they're still relevant, if they're still productive or counterproductive. But you know, that has to come from a place where knowing where we want to draw the line. I think that's what a lot of the conversation has been about.
Yeah. So it isn't that the basis of common law, for example, the whole, you know, that it needs to be current, it needs to be relevant to the times, and be alive.
Well, this is one of the reasons in law school we don't teach students just what the law is. If you taught them what the law is, great. 2 days after graduating, the law's changed. Then what are you going to do? So the law must change, and I think Kum Hung's absolutely right. Law should not be defining morality. I mean, law sets the markers in the parlance of the, it's always golf in Singapore, OB markers in Singapore. But the problem here to me is that law can do two things, and we're to some extent conflating the two. Law can criminalise and should criminalise the response. You don't take up weapons. I think the language of proportionality is wrong. I think there are bright lines that you don't commit acts of violence.
Yeah.
Whatever someone says, there's no justification for that.
Absolutely.
But in some circumstances, law can and will restrict what people say. And the interesting question that you raised is to what extent that should be predicated on the maturity of a potential response. And it's interesting that in many jurisdictions, Singapore included, there is more sensitivity to censorship, for example, in television and film than there is in print. And this is rarely articulated, but clearly the reason is there's a concern that more people will be more viscerally affected by a visual medium than by words on a page.
Right.
And so I think the reality is that law routinely does try and predict the response in terms of where the law is defined. But I come back to Kum Hong's point that that shouldn't bind us forever. That should be an ongoing discussion about what's appropriate.
Right. Now, my own sense is there's a lot of sense, a lot of logic, a lot of validity in that argument. But the question is, how do we determine what is consensus? Right now, the thing is, to a large extent, decisions are made by government, right? There is consultation, but I'm not sure how deep the level of consultation is. Now, your argument that it's got to be an iterative process, that the law should actually be relevant to the sensibilities of society. The question is, who defines the sensibilities of society at a certain point in time? In Singapore, to a large extent, is defined by the government, based on their reading of what the sensibilities are. What I'm hearing is, we all need to participate a lot more in defining that sensibilities as a society. I think that's what's needed, you know. So, can I have the comments from the two individuals who haven't spoken yet?
What I would like to say is that we should be more open in making decisions, not only just the government, because they know what they could give us the backbone to it, you know, so that we can structure it up. So we will give the ideas of what we think would be better, and they can evaluate it and come up with the laws, rather than they set the law and we just follow. So there's no input of us. We are just following them. Whatever is there, we obey. So this is what Singapore has been.
So how do you think we can give our inputs to the government?
So we can open up like online portals and stuff, so that the government have a direct views on this. It's a professional portal, so that people can raise up concern on these views and the discussion. Maybe our government can come and give us feedback through that. Oh, this shouldn't be done. There's no transparency between government and the people. So
not enough.
Not enough. So
okay.
Like the case of Amos Yee, we still don't understand why is he being punished. In what angle they see is it. You see? So the people are still wondering, oh, he should be punished, but why he should be punished? In what circumstances make him to be punished? So there wasn't any transparency between the government and the people.
Okay. Waiman, you want to talk? You want to comment? It's up to you. Then I'll give Charmaine the final word.
Yeah, one thought I had when everyone was speaking, there's this concept of safe space that has been raised previously. I mean, even I think at a forum by Mr. Ho Kwon Ping, and after that generated some discussions. And I think a lot of the discussion today was generally around, I mean, what is a safe space to have discussions, and especially when we're talking about sensitive issues like race and religion. And I guess there is, I mean, my understanding is that there possibly is a consensus right now that when we're at forums where we are seeing each other personally face to face, then it's generally considered quite safe. But when the internet is concerned, and the specific cases that we are talking about today is mainly in the internet sphere. Yeah. And I don't have a conclusion on that yet, but one question I would pose with regards to rules of engagement is who sets the rules of engagement for the internet? And there seems to be different opinions on that. Should it be the law? And my sense is that right now, when we're looking at the law and or even the state, it seems to be having a more, I mean, it seems to be a bit more dominant when we're looking at the internet sphere. And in that sense, what can be the solution to it? Should there be more people taking the initiative to set the rules of engagement by actually actively participating in the discussion, which I guess we have to ask, is that enough? Yeah, I'll just end on with that. Thank you.
With regards to finding solutions and doing things to improve the situation, I feel that a lot of it has to do with how we separate our personal emotions towards our certain beliefs with our rational thoughts towards our belief. And I think that this is something that's going to take a while to process because it has a lot to do with tradition. People have a lot of beliefs because of what they're taught at home or at school, and it's something that it's a mindset that they believe to be right because of what others say, rather than you know, they through questioning what they believe, reading up on what they believe. Yeah, so I think tradition is a tricky thing, and it's something that I think will just pass with time. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, Kam Hong, quick comment, final statement.
I would say this discussion has been going, I mean, not this discussion, but the discussion of free speech has been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
I've said this earlier in the discussion. I do think that, you know, it's important to take a longer term view and recognize that we've become a lot more open than before. Having said that, at the same time, I think it's also important to recognize that we are still far from where we should be, or at least where I think we should be. And I think forums like this are important in terms of moving the ball forward, so to speak. But I think ultimately it's really down to all Singaporeans to articulate their views. And on that, I'm actually agnostic on the view that you articulate. Because even if you choose to say that there should be less freedom of speech, in a way that contributes, I mean, that just makes everything richer. And that actually makes us more resilient as a society. You know? So I actually think, you know, that's incumbent on all Singaporeans. It's part of your responsibility, you know, to make this country what it can be. You know, there's still so much potential that we haven't achieved.
Thank you. Simon.
So I've been teaching law in Singapore for 8 years now. And one module that I teach, we look at the Internal Security Act. And something I've noticed is that in the 8 years I've been teaching, the discussion's getting much better. And there is a slim possibility that's because I'm a better teacher. I don't think it is. I think it's because the students are getting more talkative and they're more prepared to express views in all directions, even on potentially controversial topics like the Internal Security Act. So I think Kum Hong's right, that we need more speech. The solution to the problem of free speech is more speech. And I suppose the last thing I'd say is that we've been talking a lot about the government. Yes, the government has a role to play. We've been talking about the crazy people, and yes, they need to be restrained. We've been talking about the people who speak and how they, in some circumstances, might want to exercise caution. But there's a whole mass of people which are the viewing and listening and reading public. And so maybe the next time a teenager says something crazy, rather than filing a police report, just turn off your computer, go and read a book or something.
Yeah. And, you know, for me, the fact that we have had this discussion and nobody's turned violent, not yet anyway, I think we've had a sensible discussion. We've had a spectrum of views. I don't think we necessarily have to agree with each other, but we can see that each of us has a point of view and has a right to have the point of view. I think that's the first step. And I'm glad that we've had this discussion. And I hope that there'll be a lot more of these discussions, not just in closed spaces, but online, in video form. Video is a very powerful thing because you're on vision, you're accountable. And when more and more people see that there are enough people willing to put their money where their mouth is and speak without fear, it will have a powerful effect on the rest of society. But it must have an impact on government too. And the impact on government is that they have to communicate a lot more. Not when they choose to, but because they have to. They owe it to Singaporeans to be a lot more open and willing to explain decisions. And I feel that in this case, that is one thing that they could have done, government could have done a lot more. Government, I'm including the Attorney General's office, I'm talking about the judiciary, whoever else is involved in this. Because when people don't have enough clarity about why certain decisions were made, there is a lot more room for distrust. And when there's distrust, there is a lot more room for unnecessary restraint. And unnecessary restraint leads to progress being retarded. And at the end of the day, there has to be dialogue on the basis of trust between the different parties in the state. And it cannot be a master-slave relationship. It can't be. We are partners, and we should be treated as partners, and then the trust will begin, and I think we can then start speaking openly without having to look over our shoulder or wonder if that's a sprinkler. Right? I hope the day will come when we don't need to keep guessing. Right? So it leaves me to thank all of you for taking time off to be with us, and more than that, to actually send a clear signal, to join us to send a clear signal that it is all right to speak up. In fact, it is our right to speak up and speak out. Thank you. All right, so it leaves me now to thank my panelists, Kam Hong, Simon, and of course, each one of you. Really, you've been a terrific audience, and I really thank you for being here this evening. Right. Please do join us in the debate online. Do ask your friends to join us in the debate online. This conversation needs to continue, right? Please ask your friends to join us, ask your students to join us, right? And it's www.inconvenientquestions.sg. And try and like us as well, if you can. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook for the latest news, and watch our previous debates on our YouTube channel. Remember, you ask, they answer, we make it happen. Right. This has been IQ.